I have been looking at Psalm 2, doing a comparison of the Hebrew and Septuagint text, looking at each word grammatically, an inductive approach, and then talking a little bit about the meaning of the text and also New Testament application. We are now at verse 4. We have looked at the first three verses in the previous tape, where the nations are raging against the king that is being coronated, and in so doing, they're raging against the Lord and against his anointed. Let us break their bands asunder. Let us cast their cords from us, is what they're saying. We talked about how that would have a historical fulfillment, possibly in David. According to Rashi, he takes that point of view in 2 Samuel 5:17, when the Philistines came up against David. In the New Testament, it is clearly applied to Christ, and Acts 4 applies it to the crucifixion. We looked at that of our Lord Jesus Christ. And this text is quoted by Luke in Acts, and he talks about how there is a revolt around the cross, Herod, Pontius Pilate, everybody. And that's in Acts chapter 4, looking at the fulfillment of these first three verses, and what we could call the first movement of the psalm. Now we come to verse 4 to 6. I'll be reading it in Hebrew, looking at the grammar, and then going to the Septuagint, reading it in Greek, looking at the grammar. Remember, the Septuagint is the translation of the Hebrew Bible, around 250 to 200 BC. I personally follow the Masoretic text rather than the Septuagint, but the Septuagint is often quoted in the New Testament. And I think the Holy Spirit inspired the biblical writers to quote from the Septuagint often, because that would have been the language that people would have understood, that is Greek. So now we are at verse 4. Yoshev Bashemayim Yischak, Adonai Yil'ag Lamo. The one who sits in the heavens will laugh. The Lord will jeer at them. Or not only jeer, it's a bold anthropomorphism. He will deride them or laugh at their efforts at this rebellion, the psalmist is saying. Notice Yoshev is a cow active participle, masculine singular from Yashav. Yishak is a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Sachak. And Yoag is also the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from La'ag, to laugh. And then we go to verse 5. Az yedaber relemo ve'apo, uvacharono yavahalemo. Then he will speak unto them in his anger, and he will terrify them in his wrath. Notice as we look at the grammar briefly here, we have then yedaber. Yedaber is from the root dabar, to speak. It has a shava pathak, doubling of the middle radical in the bait. So we're looking at a PL imperfect, third masculine singular from dabar. Then he will speak unto them in his wrath, or in his anger. And then in his wrath, uvacharono yavahalemo. In his wrath, he will terrify them. Notice, yavahalemo is also a PL imperfect, third masculine singular from the root bahal, to terrify. And amo is your pronominal suffix, third masculine plural, onto that PL imperfect. And so we move on then. That is, God is speaking from heaven. They were whispering rebellion, yegu, they were muttering under the breath, he thunders from heaven, and he is sovereignly on his throne, David is saying, determined that his king would be coronated. Then we come to verse 6. Va'ani nasakti malki al Sion har kodshi. But I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Notice ani here is your personal pronoun I, and va could be translated truly, I. Nasakti is from the root nasak, to install or establish, the cow perfect first person singular from nasak. But I have established my king upon, al is your preposition, upon Zion, har kodsho. We could render this mountain of my holiness. Two nouns in construct, mountain of the holiness of me, literally. So we could render it my holy mountain. And the E is your pronominal suffix, first common singular, added to kodesh, becoming kodshi in construct with E. So God is determined that his king would be established, chosen by him upon my holy mountain, which is another name for Jerusalem, a poetic name. So basically, in the historic context, it would be looking at David or another Israeli king being coronated. In the New Testament application, it would look at Christ, and we'll talk about the coronation day as the resurrection in Acts, and as Paul describes it in the book of Acts, but also upon Zion would have reference to Mount Zion in an applicational sense to God's, can I say, kingdom in heaven, his eternal kingdom, which will be in a new heaven and new earth, in a new Jerusalem. So this is the Hebrew. What I'd like to do now is read the Septuagint text and look at the translation and the grammar. It reads, let me find it here. Okay, it reads, ho or ha katoikon in uranois, egelasita autus, kai hakurias ekmukterie autus. That is, the one who dwells in the heavens shall laugh, literally, laugh them to scorn, and the Lord shall mock them. Notice ha katoikon. Here we have a participle, present active participle, nominative masculine singular from katoikeo, a contract verb. So the one who dwells in the heavens will laugh at them, laugh them to scorn. And the root here is ekelao, and ekelasitai is your future indicative middle, third person singular from ekelao, meaning to laugh to scorn or to mock. Actually, we could render this laugh to scorn, she'll laugh at them. And then kai hakurias, and the Lord, and then ekmukteree, the Lord shall mock them. This is from the root ekmuterizo, meaning to mock. And here we have the future indicative active, third person singular from that root. Then he will speak to them. Tata la lese pras autus in orge autu, kai ento sumo autu taraxe autus. Then he will speak to them in his wrath, and in his anger he will trouble them. Notice lalese is from laleo. It is your future indicative active third person singular from laleo. Then he will speak to them in his wrath, and in his anger he will trouble them. Taraxe is from tarasso, to trouble. And notice with your two sigmas of that root, when you add a third sigma, making it future, it changes to xe. So he will speak to them in his wrath, and in his anger he will trouble them. In other words, the Lord is going to judge those that are not accepting his coronated one. And so the Hebrew and the Greek are very similar here, but now we come to the next verse, and it's very different in the Greek. It reads, ego de katestathen, basilus, hup autu, epixion, aras ta hagion autu, diagelon ta prastagma curio. But I have installed her, or made, I have been, literally, made king by him upon Zion, his holy mountain, declaring the ordinance or decree of the Lord. Notice, I have been made king. This is from kathistemi. It is your aorist indicative passive, a first person singular from kathistemi. So I have been made king by him, hup autu, upon Zion, his holy mountain. Notice here we have a different read where the Hebrew says, Ani, but I, Ani nasakti malki out Zion har kodshi, but I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. So the Septuagint reads differently, but I have been installed, where the king is now speaking. I have been installed king by him, that is, by the Lord, upon Zion, his holy mountain, declaring the ordinance of the Lord. So there is a different way that this reads in the Septuagint from the Hebrew. And I guess one of the questions you have to ask is the Septuagint looking at a different Hebrew text that we do not have today, that they had access to, where what we're looking at in the Hebrew is the Masoretic text. And remember, the Hebrew was written in consonants. Vowels were added by the Masoretes around 700 AD. And so most teachers, those who taught me, and I follow that myself, follow the Masoretic text rather than the Septuagint. This text is not quoted in the New Testament in terms of the Septuagint quote, or even in the Hebrew. The question, though, that we need to ask here is what's going on? And it's possible that we have a paraphrase going on, or an interpretation going on. In other words, I have established my king upon Zion, my holy mountain, the Sakti, where we have, I have been made king. And there's a different read here at that point. And basically, it's possible that this would have been a nifal form, ninsakti, and the noon of the stem had assimilated into the Samic. That's possible. It's a possible way that the Septuagint translators had read it. So then I have been installed his king, and that yod then would have had to been read as a vav. But upon Zion, his holy mountain. I'm just wondering if we're not looking, though, at possibly an interpretation, a paraphrase that we have where the Septuagint is quoting, in other words, making a point that the king has been established. And we're starting the statement here in verse 6 instead in verse 7. Where verse 7, I will declare the decree. And maybe the Septuagint translators not having vowels or doggish forte or anything that would indicate this to be a nifal. However, when we look at the Hebrew, it is clearly just your cow perfect third masculine singular in the Sakti. So I'm wondering, and I'm not dogmatic, could it have been that they are doing a paraphrase and making the point that it's God's holy mountain that this king has been established on to drive home the point? When you're rebelling against him, you're rebelling against God and his holy mountain. However, there may have been an alternative text that we don't have or that we don't know about. Again, I personally follow the Masoretic text in the read, and I do that throughout my studies of the Hebrew Bible. So I wanted to point out. There is a difference in terms of a slight difference. Are we talking about I have been established, or I will, or I have established my king, which is the Masoretic text, upon Zion, my holy mountain, over against the Septuagint, which read basically, I was established king upon by him upon Zion, his holy mountain. Again, it's hard to be dogmatic, but I would personally follow the Masoretic text, seeing the Septuagint possibly as more of a paraphrase, more of an interpretation. Could have been an alternative text, but I guess I would lean more to the paraphrase. And again, I wouldn't be super dogmatic, but I wanted to point out those differences. So the important thing is that God's king is going to be established. And as we go to the next movement, we'll see how that in the New Testament, it clearly looks at the resurrection of Christ. The resurrection is the coronation day of Jesus Christ.